please explain Romans 1:26 through 28 when it says reprobate mind? Is it directed specifically to homosexual acts or to sins in general? A relative feels homosexuals are somehow harder to reach with the gospel due to having a reprobate mind. I don't think that.
Well, homosexuality is just one sin that's mentioned in Romans 1. If you go to the end of the chapter, so we're talking about 26, what was it?
26 through 28.
Let me just read it so we all know what we're talking about. And I'm going to start in verse 24 just to ramp up to speed, because this particular section of Romans, the second half of Romans 1, is talking about the response to human beings to the revelation that is available to everyone that God is real, that he exists, and that his attributes, he has certain attributes. And what they do is they suppress the obvious truth about God because they have unrighteous motives. Jesus said in John 3, the light has come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, for their deeds were evil. Now, he's referring to himself as the light of the world, but a parallel concept is expressed here. Here's God the Father revealed to the world through through nature, if you will, through the world, and people see God and they suppress that truth because they have unrighteous motives. So in verse 24, therefore, because they've done this, they've exchanged the glory of God, who is incorruptible, with idols and stuff like that, creatures. God gave them over in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. And what he's describing there is God is letting people rebel, and the nature of the rebellion is they exchanged the truth for a lie. And this is why they are idolatrous, worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator. And there may be a reference here to homosexuality, the creature being other men or other women, because lesbianism is mentioned here. So I continue. For this reason, and this is verse 26 and following now, God gave them over to degrading passions, for their women exchanged the natural function for that which is unnatural. Women weren't meant to function with women. And in the same way, also sexually, that is, men abandoned the natural function of the woman for man, sexually, and burned in their desire toward one another, men with men committing indecent acts and receiving in their own person the due penalty of their error, which I take to be judgment here, not some sickness, because this is the nature. They are without excuse. Just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind. The depraved mind was already there, but God is just releasing them to experience the full effects of their degradation. And then right after that, he says they did not do the things that were proper, being filled with all unrighteousness, wickedness, greed, evil, full of envy, murder, strife, deceit, malice, gossip, slanderers, haters of God. So you got a whole list, Rugg's list of vice here. And it caps it off at the end. They not only do these things, but they give hearty approval to those who do that. So it is the fallen human being that suppresses the truth and unrighteousness, that has the depraved mind, and he uses homosexuality and lesbianism as one characteristic sin of a depraved mind, and then he adds all the other sins at the end. So I don't think the problem is just homosexuality that have a especially difficult time coming to Christ. They're like anybody else. They've got a lot at stake in their own celebrating their own autonomy, their own sexual desires, and doing what they want, and so they're going to suppress the truth and unrighteousness, just like all the rest that are characterized a couple of verses later. So I think this is not, in a sense, picking out homosexuals for specific condemnation, but using them as an example of a rebellion against God's provision. Notice the word function in there. It's the Greek word krisis, that men were made to function with women sexually, and we're talking about plumbing here now, and women were made to function sexually with men. And what mankind did in suppressing the truth in unrighteousness, they're saying no to God. I'm going to choose my sexual partners the way I want and not according to your provision. Notice the wording here in verse 27. In the same way, also, the men abandoned the natural function of the woman. The woman had a function for them. They abandoned the woman that God made to function with them. Okay? And so it's just an example of saying no to God in the area of sexuality. And by the way, the same kind of thing happens when in fornication. That is men or adultery. Men abandon the woman that God ordained for them, which is a wife. And so they have fornication before they're married, or husbands abandon the wife that God has given them in marriage and burn in their lust to someone else. So it's the same pattern in all the sexual sin of saying no to God's provision for human beings sexually and saying yes to something they want contrary to God. And that's just really archetypical of the rebellion that you see characterized in the other sins at the end of the chapter.
Yeah, you mentioned verse 18, which starts all of this off about men suppressing the truth and unrighteousness. This all goes back to suppressing the knowledge of God. And as you said, Greg, these are different ways this plays out, including disobedience to parents, being unmerciful. There's a ton of things here, as you pointed out. And I just want to say that every person's salvation is a miracle. It's not that, oh, well, this one's impossible and this one's better. No, actually, every person is by nature a child of God's wrath. By nature. Every single person. And that means every salvation is a miracle. And if every salvation is a miracle, God can save somebody who's in sexual sin as easily as he can save someone in any sin. It's as impossible for every person as it is possible for God for every person. So
well put.
We should never, and I'm afraid people write people off just because they're in sexual sin. And now we experience things like that as maybe more enslaving, maybe harder to break out of. But for God, all things are possible.